Hello, everyone. Carrie, I'm ready. All right, let me get my share screen going here. Technology, technology, technology. Carrie, can you see the slides? I can't see the slides. Okay, no slides. Okay, back to the drawing board here. Hello, everyone. Let me try to get my slides up here for you, and then we can start our wonderful recovery group together. All right, let me see here. Okay, Carrie, give me a text and let me know if you can see the slides, please. Okay, she can see. That means most of you should be able to see. Welcome back to another virtual stroke recovery group. I am so happy to be here with you today. It is a very warm day in North Carolina today, and not because of that, but I have changed my seating arrangement here a little bit. Got some nicer, kind of more sunny, happy stuff going on behind me. I have had such a wonderful time getting to know you all and know your all stories as we go through this learning experience together. So I just wanted to start off by saying thank you so much for being here. I did review an MRI this week, but I actually wound up doing it privately with a wonderful couple over the phone, and we went through interpreting the interpretation together. So I don't actually have one to do tonight to start off, but I did want to remind you all, if you are able to get your MRI or your CT scan from when you had your stroke, you're more than welcome to email it to me. And my email is on the I Care for Your Brain website, or when you signed up, you should have gotten an email. And I'm happy to interpret the interpretation. I can't interpret the images, but I can certainly help you decode what a lot of those words mean that are very long and unfortunately not very intelligible. So let's recap what we did together last time. So based on the third session, I hope that you felt enlightened about how much hard work and rest has to go into a recovery after a stroke. And I know that a lot of that information is much easier said than done. And I really appreciate that. I know that there's so many of you who wish that you or your loved one had the attention, the focus, the physical, the mental energy to be able to do all those repetitions, and that's not always possible. So as always, you have to personalize this knowledge, and I want you to take it and apply it to the very best of your ability to your life or your loved one's life. But the lessons there for Rule 3 were that consistent repetition is the most important part of recovering any ability after a stroke, and that's really what we're trying to do in this group, is taking all of those symptoms that I hope you identified in Rule 1 from that big old graphic where we talked about the importance of recognizing and validating all your symptoms. And whether or not you're trying to get a visual field loss back, whether or not you're trying to get your right hand back, whether or not you're trying to be less impulsive, whether or not you're trying to speak better, repetition, repetition, repetition. And that means different things to different people within where their recovery is. That's why we say so often that it's critical to meet your recovery exactly where it is. No two brains are the same. No two recoveries are going to be the same. And so you really have to take this information and figure out how it works for you. The next one is a reminder that we talked about that science is very clear when we look at animal studies and human studies of stroke, that when enough repetition is done, that there are long-term significant improvements in the connections between brain cells, and that functions either can return through compensation, through a workaround, through different parts of the brain taking up that area, or by acceptance. We always want to remember that acceptance is also a skill that you're working on. Full recoveries, particularly after big strokes, are not very common. And that doesn't mean that you can't return to a life of high quality and high function and independence and doing as many things as you can. But in my experience, sometimes people become very black or white about their stroke recovery, and it can become kind of either or. I either have to return to the way I was before, or this recovery wasn't a success. And I just really want to support you in not giving into that mindset, because for some people that's just not realistic. And so what we have to talk about too is that repetition in terms of working on acceptance is also a part of rehab. And there's other rules we have as we go through this group together where we're really going to focus on what that means. Because too often people say that word, acceptance, but they don't tell you how to do the acceptance. And so it kind of can become this kind of lofty goal that's not realistic. And if there's one thing I don't like, it's when things are not realistic. So what I've encouraged you to do is to focus on the number of repetitions in a therapy session, not just the time, because it's too easy to say, well, I did a half hour today, or my loved one did 45 minutes of speech. What it really comes down to is how many repetitions were done within that specific rehab session. We also talked about the importance of what you do after rehab. It's very important that you also come into that decision with an informed mindset. And so what I encouraged you to do is to consider actively resting by taking a little nap, breathing. Really, I've been focusing on trying to do that 4-7-8 breathing. And you know what's the hardest part about that is holding in the 7. I can breathe in 4 pretty darn good. But then when I try to hold on to 7, that gets harder and harder, and you're so happy to try to release it after. But I did notice after even doing that 4 or 5 times, I definitely felt my nervous system take it down a notch. And we also talked about understanding neurofatigue and how to manage it, even though there's really no perfect solution to the neurofatigue issue. It's such a barrier for so many of you, but I did want to make one clarification based on a wonderful conversation that I had earlier today with someone, which is there is the kind of neurofatigue that can be improved through behavior and strategy and kind of motivation. That's kind of to a degree, there's some voluntary control over it, whereas if you activity pace, if you delegate to other people, if you work with nutrition and all that good stuff, it can be helped. And then there's other folks that unfortunately have either a larger stroke, or many times if there's a stroke that affects 2 parts of the brain in each hemisphere, that can often result in poor initiation, which is just, it's not even a matter of energy, it's very involuntary. It's just there's not a high enough level of arousal. This is kind of like the spectrum of the locked in syndrome, all the way up to people who've had really big strokes, again, that affect both sides of their brain in the same structure. And there's just kind of like what we might call like a low tone in the brain. It's just kind of not really able to have enough space to do the repetitions. There's not enough of an ability to stay kind of that alert and engaged. And that one is much more of a neurochemical, neuroanatomical problem. And that one is really where the stimulants come in, because try as you might on the other side, those things might not be effective with folks who have these larger or more what we call bilateral strokes. So let me just make one comment on that before we transition. So in the brain, we have the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, and there's a big old fiber strip down the middle called the corpus callosum, which helps those 2 hemispheres communicate. And because the brain and the body and biology is so smart, we have what we call redundancy in the brain, where we have backup systems where we have a left hippocampus here that helps us with verbal memory, and we have a right hippocampus here, which helps us with spatial or nonverbal memory. And one of the ideas is that if one side of the brain gets damaged, there's another one on the other side that can become very functional, and there's a high amount of neuroplasticity that can happen between those 2 parts of the brain. When we really see big impairments in the brain is when we see folks have these bilateral issues, meaning that both sides of the brain, both hippocampus took a hit, and then it's very hard for the rest of the brain to compensate. And so that's, again, goes back to your MRI or your CT. It's very important that you know exactly where in your brain this stroke or your strokes happen. So what we talk about is that repetition is the fuel of neuroplasticity, but that consistency is what keeps it going. Consistency is what kind of keeps you running the marathon. And what that means is, trying to have a schedule of therapy. Like all things in life that we know are good for us, it's human nature to get hot and cold. You can be great about exercising 1 week and then you don't exercise for 4 weeks. Rehab is no different than that, but it's really key to keep at it because it's very easy to backslide in our brain recoveries. And so we just also want to make sure we're keeping up with it over time. We also talked last time about a movement towards massed practice, and we talked about constraint therapy. So, taping in or using a sling to hold in your good arm and going around 90% of your day trying to use that other arm. And what we talked about is how that is so intensive, it's so much, but that's really the philosophy that's needed to get functions to return, and that most outpatient sessions just don't have enough repetitions per session to really get people the best recovery. And of course, that's what most of you get offered through insurance-based payment. So my idea is that's why I do this group and wrote the stroke recovery book, is because I want you to know what it would really take. So at least you have the opportunity to do the optimal approach to stroke recovery if you are able or choose to. So really, to me, it's you and your loved one and your immediate care team that are going to have to advocate for enough rehab to be done, to do the exercises at home, not just do them when you go to the outpatient therapy centers. It's really the carryover to home that's going to make the big difference. And I know that that's hard because therapy can be exhausting and people feel like, well, I did what the therapist asked me to do. And it's better than nothing, of course, but what's really going to get you better is to do it at home 2, 3, 4, 5 times a day, that set of exercises. And I worry that people get discouraged, or they don't think therapy works, or that's why we don't think as a field of medicine that rehab should really be done past the first year. It's because we're not doing enough of it to get the results that would reinforce it and show that it was actually worth people's time and money. So we talked about what to do after all that repetition, and I hope that that was a nice contribution to the way you're doing your recovery, because I do think we focus so much on the doing part that we also don't give people proper instruction on how to rest. And remember, what we keep talking about in this group is that recovery really boils down to that phrase, enriched environments. And so we're trying to teach you all the specifics of how to do the rehab, how to have enough repetitions, how to make it personal, how to keep making it more and more complex, more and more difficult, keep it on a schedule. But we also have to teach you that there's an art and a science to the downtime too. And so we talked about, listening to music, taking less than an hour nap, and the importance of avoiding stress after a hard therapy session, because that kind of negates a lot of the hard work that your brain is doing. So the brain really needs time to store and absorb everything that it has learned. And I hope that you really got out of our last session the importance of really fine-tuning your attention and your eyesight and the way you're looking at this recovery, to not just keep waiting for the big breakthroughs. That stroke recovery happens in all different ways, but for the most part, you take baby steps and you get slower and slower, more closely to your goal. But if you're not paying attention and you're not focusing your mind enough on the little tiny things that are getting better, again, you're not going to be reinforced. That so much of who we are as human beings, as people who have a spirit and a psychology, is we have to feel like our efforts are being rewarded. So I really want you and your care partner to really tune into that. And any little thing that you feel like is a payoff, it's really important to me that you celebrate it in a way that's meaningful to you, which, for some people is let's take a drive and go look at, a beautiful scene. Some people it's an ice cream cone. Some people it's, I'm going to relax on Sunday and put the game on and not feel pressured to go do something else. Whatever it is for you, that's what it is I want you to do. Okay, so really critical that you notice what's happening along the way in your recovery. So now we're going to get to rule number 4. I love this rule because I love creativity, and I love art, and I like aesthetics, and I like the way things look, and I like colors. And I think that creativity is such a joyful part of being a human being. And all too often, you've heard me say this before, rehab can become very medicalized. A stroke can become very medicalized, and that becomes the identity, and that becomes the focus of life. But I always want you to remember that your humanity is first. Who you are as a person is first. And yes, this stroke is important, and yes, it's serious, but it really is not your total person, okay? So rule number 4 is to really take advantage and harness your creative power, using your creativity and the power of your thoughts to enhance your recovery. So is this rule relevant to you? Well, I want you to be concerned and listen closely. If you feel that your rehab doesn't have any or much joy. So what do I mean by that? A lot of people approach their therapy like it is drudgery. They resent it sometimes. They are bored by it. It just kind of feels like the same old, same old. And again, you know, I'm stereotyping. That's certainly not necessarily the case for you. But I think all too often, if we, again, accept insurance-based approach to stroke rehab, all too often it lacks a certain spontaneity and fun and joy. If it's hard sometimes for you to think on the positive, hopeful side, so if you find yourself spending a lot of time thinking about what you can't do and kind of can get over-focused on the limitations. And it's really important to me that when I say these things, you guys realize that I have not had a stroke. So I respect that all of this is much easier said than done. I respect that you are the expert on stroke in a way that I absolutely am not. So please know that I have sensitivity in my heart when I say these things. But also what I do know from reading the scientific literature is that attitude matters quite a bit. And this idea of how you think about your rehab is really important. If it always feels like it's kind of a drag and, you know, you can kind of eye roll when you think about it, that's not doing yourself any favors. We really know that how you think about it makes a big difference. If you often feel bored, I hear people say that a lot, where they feel like they get the printout from the therapist and they do it at home, but it's kind of the same old thing over and over again. There's not really anything to kind of keep their interest. Okay, if most of your conversations come back to the stroke, that's to me a sign that the stroke has kind of taken over. Some of the benefits of what we're going to talk about today, which is being creative, being surrounded by things that are artful, is that it can consume your energy and your focus and your attention, and it can take your mind off of your stroke and your stroke recovery. I don't think it helps your well-being to constantly think about the stroke and what has happened to you. And on the other hand, as you're going to find out as we go through the rules together, it's actually very important that you sometimes do spend time doing that. So I know it's a little bit hard to find that balance, but what I'm really talking about here are when it kind of consumes your every waking hour. There's really a time and a place to focus on the grief part of this and the trauma part of this, and much too often we don't do that well. But what I'm really talking about here is this idea that it's kind of all you think about, okay? If most of your social activities are going to the doctor, to me, I hear that a lot from people because there are a lot of doctors to see and there's a lot of appointments to go to, but we also need to make sure that we're making time to do other things too. If you haven't had a sense of awe or wonder in recent memory, where you did something or you saw something or you heard something that just made you feel moved, or it made you feel, you know, a sense of wonder or thrill within yourself, you know, that's concerning to me. We need to bring that positive energy back into your recovery. So how can we breathe this new vibrancy into your recovery and make the rehab more enjoyable? This is where we can get creative and bring the mind into brain recovery. So creativity promotes neuroplasticity. That's our favorite word here, right? Creative action after a stroke leads to physical strengthening between the brain cells. So look at the picture here, and you can see that we've got our little nodes and our brain networks, right? The more creative something is, the more expanded the brain network is, which is so cool because remember we talked about that's a real positive in stroke recovery, that networks aren't just in one part of the brain, almost always. Some things are very, very specific in the brain, but most things actually happen all over the brain. So one rule of thumb with the brain is the more creative something is, the more of your brain you have to use to have that experience. I thought that was pretty insightful. Different types of art stimulate different parts of the brain. Of course, we're going to talk about this tonight. We've got music, we've got visual art, we've got dance, and all of those stimulations are very complex and unique. And that's one thing we know really drives neuroplasticity. The more unusual something is, the more it gets our attention. I mean, that's just something that's evolved in us as human beings over time. If you could only imagine how many things we all have to pay attention to, really at any moment of the day, the brain has to have the ability to be drawn to certain things that are important. And the brain is most hardwired to draw its attention to threat and things that are dangerous. And, you know, it's like if you ever see a little, like, for example, let's say a praying mantis jumps onto your computer screen when you're trying to hold a lecture for some very special people online. Your attention is going to be like, oh my gosh, there is a giant bug on my computer. And it's very hard to then go back to what you were doing before. This is how the brain works. And so things that are unique or complex are right under threat. And so a lot of art, a lot of creativity, that's why it's kind of enticing to us, is because it's different. Wow, I never saw those colors together, or it made me feel something, or gosh, that melody just kind of drew me in. It's really the complexity of creative things that make our brain excited. And really, art is a bridge. Art is something that connects us to our own experience, our own emotions, and to each other. As we go through the different types of art today, you know, the one that's probably the most universal is music. And so I know we talked about that as a way to personalize your recovery. And I really hope that you guys took that to heart and have found a way to bring music into your recovery, whether it's on the front end to get you motivated, whether or not it's on the back end. It's really important that you take advantage of music. It's just so human and it's so inspiring. So art-based rehab stimulates the brain through all the senses, right? It creates a safe environment for self-expression, and it encourages communication. So now instead of focusing so much on like muscle strength or coordination or motor planning or aphasia or memory loss or swallowing, what this rule is really saying is that we need to take a step back from all that stuff and really try to also heal the person, the soul that has been through the experience of stroke. And so when you read the literature on art-based rehab, what they talk a lot about is that it's so important to give people a medium to communicate something overwhelming that has happened to them. And when there is problems with speaking or with self-expression, that we have to find another way to do that. That desire to communicate what we've been through is so human, it's so necessary, that if we don't incorporate that into stroke recovery, we're really missing the boat. And I feel that very strongly. It's the way to bring the person back into stroke recovery. Okay, so what I wanted to do, I thought this might be helpful for you guys. Let me get rid of that little guy there, is to actually go through a research study that I found that was done about 4 years ago. I believe it was done in Japan, and they actually looked at the effects of creative art therapy. And what they did is they used it as an add-on. So they had people, 118 people were in an inpatient stroke unit. They were all over 50 years old, and they were all getting typical PT, physical therapy, about 5 days a week. So that was one group. In another group, they got the 5 days a week of PT, but they also got creative art therapy twice a week. And this happened for 4 weeks total. So one group just gets PT, the other group gets both PT and art therapy. So the art group reported statistically significant improvements in depression, better physical functioning, and quality of life. And when it comes down to it at the end of the day, I think we would all agree it's quality of life that we're all searching for, right? So they asked the folks after the sessions, the art group, what they thought. And 69% of them said they felt they could focus better, they could concentrate better since they had spent time doing the art therapy. 72% reported that they felt more self-confident, which I think is very important after a stroke. 74% said that they felt more motivated, not just to do more artwork, but to do their physical therapy too. And 80% reported that they felt that their emotions had improved. And if you were to ask people the same thing about physical therapy or occupational therapy or speech therapy, you don't see these numbers. You don't see 80% of people saying that physical therapy improved their emotions. So what I liked about this is they didn't pit these therapies against each other. They didn't say, well, how about PT versus art therapy? There's an acceptance that art therapy is really an add-on. We would never want someone with aphasia, for example, to just do art therapy, but certainly adding art therapy to speech therapy is a wonderful creative way to personalize the therapy and to really help the person find more joy and positive experience. I hear this all the time when I start talking about art therapy. People will say, but I'm not an artist. I can't even draw a square. Well, guess what? You really don't have to be an artist to benefit from art therapy. You don't have to be musical. You don't have to be able to hold a note. You can be tone deaf. I want you to just think about it like it's a nonverbal way to express yourself. And you know, again, I haven't had a stroke, but I've been around many, many people who have. And despite any of my professional thoughts about what's happening in their brain or what's going on in their brain structures that's making them have trouble talk or move their left side, the thing that is always first and foremost in my mind is what has this human being gone through? And how can I reassure them in a context of what must be incredibly overwhelming that they are still connected and they are not alone out on an island? And that's where I've really grown to appreciate art therapy, because it can sometimes be that bridge that connects us back to the person. That's something that I've thought about quite a bit, how scary and alone people must feel when they're in the hospital with a stroke, just really not being able to take it all in and so much hubbub. That's part of this COVID thing in our brain health community, is to then have that experience and then not be able to have your loved ones come to the hospital is just such a devastating thing that's happening. So creativity promotes healing and quality of life. The key is to find a creative activity that feels good to you. Each creative approach has its own advantage. So let's just go through those four. Like I said before, the most valuable thing for the brain in terms of creative therapies is that it's unique, right? It uses a lot of our senses. So again, if we kind of use music as an example, the stimulation of pitch, of melody, of lyrics, of memories that go along with the song. So much comes flooding into the brain when we hear certain songs, right? We talked about Amazing Grace. You know, the Star Spangled Banner. I mean, just songs that are so universally emotion provoking, have a big reaction. And that reaction is not just a feeling, that reaction is brain chemistry. That reaction is electricity in the brain, it's stimulation, and that's all the stuff that we need. Somebody had just said to me today, you know, with a physical injury after stroke, it's very clear how you stimulate the muscle, right? We've got e-stim machines, and we can do, you know, dry needling and acupuncture and massage and spasticity stretching and all this stuff. But how exactly do we stimulate the brain? And the answer is really through novelty and things that are unique. And so art just really fits that bill very nicely. The other thing is that when we look or hear something, look at something or hear something that is pleasant, that gives us that feeling of awe or wonder or makes us smile, Again, it's not just a feeling. There's chemicals behind that feeling, and those are anti-inflammatory chemicals. Those are chemicals that relax the nervous system. They're chemicals that make our muscles not tense. They're the opposite of the chemicals that get released when we're stressed or upset about something. Adrenaline and cortisol, those make us very tight. That really fuels the fight or flight, response. And kind of always can have people feeling like they're waiting for the next shoe to drop. That is such an important part of stroke recovery, is that we help the body and the spirit get out of hypervigilance mode, kind of fearing another stroke or, you know, fearing a fall. There's so much, I think, that can happen in stroke recovery that makes people want to kind of close in and go tight. And that's not the best environment for brain recovery. We really want as much as we can for that person to feel safe, for that person to feel secure. And even if it's just for, you know, 5 minutes of looking through a art book of Picasso or Van Gogh or Monet or whoever that person might like, there is a flood of positive anti-inflammatory chemicals that are now coursing through that person's brain that ultimately can go on to support neuroplasticity. The other thing is that when we're creative, we're actually kind of submerging ourselves into creative problem solving, right? So much of what happens in my mind when I hear a song or I look at a beautiful painting is I start to wonder how it was done. You know, how did this person think about that? Or my gosh, how come those two colors went together? Or what was the technique that the person used to come up with that brush stroke or that idea? It just gets our frontal lobes, kind of the gears start working a little bit. And it's, I think, this is not a scientific opinion, but I do think it kind of is a sweet relief for the brain, because we're so verbal. We do so much as kind of linear thinkers and very concrete with our words, that I think when we can do creative problem solving and it's not quite so A plus B plus C plus D, it's a relief for the brain, and it's a unique stimulation. And the next one, I think this is really important for our brain health community, is that art can allow you to feel in control and feel that there's a sense of predictability and a safety in art. Using the example of a good song someone knows, you know, so often some of our most catastrophic strokes are these big left middle cerebral artery strokes, where we get a lot of damage and have aphasia and trouble with the right side of the body. And it's not that it's any worse or more difficult than a big right hemisphere stroke, but it's just that our culture is so verbal that when you have aphasia, I think that's an incredibly difficult thing. And to have that struggle with speaking be so ever present, I think what must happen is a feeling of losing confidence, and a feeling like just to always feel like you're struggling. And I think after a while that gets very weary for the human spirit. And so when we can find something like a song where we can anticipate the beat, we know what the lyrics are, that is a very important psychological soothing for predictability and being able to just feel, even if it's in a 2.5 minute song, that we know what to expect and we know what's going to happen in those next 2 minutes. So creativity can come in any form. You know, there's been a big resurgence of adult coloring books. I have had so many people tell me that they really enjoy that. Singing, you know, like I said, it's not about singing good. It's about just expressing yourself. So many people with left hemisphere damage, aphasia, can sing perfectly. That is a big shock to a lot of people. And especially if someone that you love or yourself was a singer before or was a musician before, please, please, please bring in as much music as you can, because so much of that person's brain is wired for all the things that go along with music. But let's not forget that there's plenty of other ways to be creative, like sewing. We're going to talk in a minute about how to modify things if you're not able to go back to doing it the way you were before. I met a lot of people down here who design greeting cards for other people. I think that's so nice, involving like collage and cutting out things from magazines. Of course, painting, drawing. But even if you're not a person who wants to be creative and do an activity that's creative, there's always room for art appreciation, simply being around artful, beautiful, creative things, and passively how you can experience that in your brain. But again, always wanting to be practical and wanting to respect that a lot of this information could be, yeah, in a perfect world, but I can't do that. Like, we always have to be realistic and find a way to help you have to meet your recovery where it is today, right? Because the worst thing would be if you didn't try, and if you felt like, just because I can't do it the way I did before, I'm not going to do it anymore. It's really, really important, even if it's in the smallest possible way, that you try to bring in something creative to the recovery journey. So again, I feel like I'm just propping up music left and right, but man, there's so much research that's just been done on it. We talked a lot about this in another session, but music is really special in the sense that it does activate and stimulate, but it also does that soothing of the central nervous system. And those going between the gas and the brake is something that can be incredibly hard in many, many, many brain injuries, stroke, TBI, dementia, so many different things, because it's such a basic part of the brain. We start things and we stop things, and we start things and we stop things. And sometimes after a stroke, we have too much gas and we can be impulsive and disinhibited, and it kind of all hangs out. A lot of times we can have too much brake, and there's a lack of initiation and a lack of kind of gas in the tank to get up and do the things. So music kind of gives our nervous system a big hand in helping to amp things up, but then calm things down. That's why being intentional about music and making sure that there's kind of calm, soothing music, but there's also kind of get up and go music. And, that makes me think of the pre-rehab, get up and go, a song that kind of just makes you feel a little bit, boogie woogie. And then after, that one piece of classical music that you love. One type of music I've been listening to a lot is Japanese flute music. And I first heard it, I was in a place that I love very much in New Mexico, and they were playing this music, and I just couldn't believe how it was like instantly total relaxation and so calming. So we bought a CD when we were out there, and we were listening to it recently, and it was incredibly powerful for me, and I just immediately felt my blood pressure kind of drop. So go on YouTube and just search Japanese flute music, and knowing that as you listen to it, it's kind of doing the work for you of de-escalating your nervous system from all of that kind of tightness that I was talking about before. The most therapeutic music after a stroke are songs and melodies that were meaningful to you or your person in the teenage and young adult years. There's just a lot of emotion there. Some people think it's because it's when we first got our first cars, and there's kind of a lot of independence and memories of kind of becoming our own person. And so a lot of research has supported that gives people the most stimulation and the most emotional response. Very importantly, music activates the emotional centers of the brain, the limbic system, which is right next to things like the basal ganglia, the thalamus. They're real close next door neighbors. And a lot of times when you can boost the emotional part of the brain, you can actually get kind of a boost for the thinking part of the brain, especially language. So let me give you an example of that. During my training, we used to do something called aphasia rounds, and this was at the Boston VA, where the study of aphasia of language really started, and there was just some absolutely masterful clinicians. And what they used to do for the trainees is they would bring in a person who had aphasia and go on a stage with the doctor, and they would kind of examine them and ask them to do things on the stage. And I'll never forget, there was a woman who was probably in her mid-60s. She came in and she couldn't speak at all. She was trying so hard, and it just wouldn't come out. He then had her sing Happy Birthday, which she proceeded to do flawlessly, complete and total fluency of her speech. So that was the first mind-blowing lesson. But the second one was he did this little memory thing as she started, where he took her purse and he said, I'm going to give it to someone in the third row in the fifth seat, and in a half hour, I'm going to ask you to tell me where your purse is. And he was doing that to be able to test her memory because she couldn't speak. But he also had a trick up his sleeve. So when he went to ask her where the purse was and she was trying to point, he had actually had someone take her purse away, maybe not so nice, but he was trying to make a point. And she thought that her purse had been stolen. So obviously this got her really emotional, and she wound up screaming out, "My purse!" And the point is that limbic system kind of pushed into the language part of the brain because she got so emotional and gave this extra fuel where the words just came pouring out. So a lot of times we can use those insights to our advantage, and to try to make things, that kind of goes along with the personalization thing. The more, oh my God, you guys, there is a yellow jacket on my keyboard. What the heck? Oh my God, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but you know I have to take a picture of this right now to post. Oh my gosh, you guys, what in the heck is going on in my house? Oh my God, I have to open the door here. Ah! This one's scarier because it could sting me. Oh, good Lord. How am I going to change these slides? Okay. Remember, you can get distracted, but you can refocus. Oh God. Okay. All right. Dance. Let's talk about dance. This is unbelievable. What is going on, you guys? Okay. Dance. A couple years ago, 2 years ago, in the media, there were all these stories. Oh God, it's coming towards me. There were all these stories. If I get stung here, you guys, this is unbelievable. Oh, get out of here. Ah, did you see it come towards me? Oh my God. Okay, I got to get it together. Okay, there were stories in the media that were promoting dance, and that dance was the most powerful brain exercise. And so I looked into that, and what it really is yes, of course, dance. I'm going to tell you in a minute why it's wonderful, but really what it is, it's the multitasking that goes along with dance. So it's doing something physical, but also trying to remember steps and to do things in a that are organized, right? Like 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, or left, right, or crossing your arm from this way to that way. So in any way that you can incorporate rhythm and trying to learn some kind of a physical step. So for some of you, it could be going and taking ballroom dancing classes. Jerry, I'm thinking maybe you and your wife can do some ballroom dance, right? For other people, it could just be, I was thinking, Joe, of your husband, you know, if there's a lot of physical disability, just trying to get someone to blink their eyes to a beat would be therapeutic, right? Or having someone try to go, you know, from left to right and then up and down. It's really all about doing something physical, but also kind of having a set program in your mind that you're trying to implement. So just physically, dance improves flexibility, muscle strength, tone, balance, your spatial awareness. The more you dance, the more you can dance. So it really helps with your endurance. It's been proven to be very powerful rehab for stroke survivors. We know that in stroke specifically, it can improve depression and balance and just overall mobility of how secure people feel when they're on their feet. That is a big thing. Fear of falling is a very real barrier for a lot of folks, especially after cerebellar strokes, anything in that back posterior part of your brain. Like I said, what's most important is that we make this recommendation realistic for you or your loved one. So any way that you can kind of think about it, even at the very least, watching people dance, right? Watching people do something like line dancing. We're going to talk in a minute about the power of mental imagery, which is so cool, such interesting research. Meaning even if you or a loved one can't do it themselves, either imagining yourself doing it or watching other people do it is very stimulating, okay? The next thing we're gonna talk about is writing, being able to, if you're able to use a pen or use a keyboard or use dictation, it can be incredibly powerful to write out how you feel, right? Fill in the blanks. We're gonna have some of those handouts in the next few rules for you guys. Writing poetry, you know, telling your story, you know, sometimes, you know, contributing to a blog post or helping other people understand your stroke journey, getting it out there. It's valuable. Your story has a lot of meaning for you, but also for other people who will maybe feel understood by what it is that you write, okay? And when we don't express our feelings, either through, you know, poetry or writing or tears or laughing or talking, this weighs on us. This can create a whole lot of weight in the body. If you remember last time I talked to you about this book called The Body Keeps the Score, and it's about all kinds of trauma. And the idea is that it's human, it's natural to be traumatized by things that are unexpected, life-threatening, that you feel like change your world in an instant and that make you feel helpless or hopeless. That's the definition of a trauma, whether it's a car accident or a stroke, okay? And when we feel traumatized, that requires a process of emotional identification, understanding how it's affected us, but also getting it out, expressing it. And we all do that different, but what I worry about is when people don't do it at all. So writing, as a suggestion for those of you that are able, is just a way to get it from in here, out there, outside of yourself. This next one is one of my favorites. One of the most painful things I think about any disability is that people can become very disconnected from their food. And what I mean by that is if someone has to go live in a skilled nursing facility or is unable to do a recipe on their own or grill on their own, that I think the way a lot of us love our people is through food, which is a wonderful, beautiful part of being a loving person and a friend. But that can also mean that people can lose their connection to cooking and being in the kitchen and being a part of it. And I think that, you know, eating and breaking bread and being together around food is such an ancient form of connection that I think if we don't bring people back into cooking, that it's not helping them. So, you know, get more involved with your food or help your loved one be more involved. Somebody can direct the action. They can tell you what to do next. You know, there's all sorts of adaptive equipment out there. I've seen everything from jar openers to to cut onions, to certain knives where you can set someone up with a little cutting board and, you know, make sure that, you know, something kind of, you know, soft-ish, maybe bananas or something, to just be able to get in there and to contribute. Tearing lettuce, being a taste tester. If the person isn't capable of participating, then just being present when food is being cooked. How good does, you know, onions and garlic and oil smell on the oven, right? Think about how stimulating that is and how many memories that brings back. This can also help people to be more aware of what they're eating. It can be a great place to incorporate new, healthier eating habits. What you eat after a stroke and your diet is one of those critical things that can help you from having another stroke. It's a big part of secondary stroke prevention. And there's really only one diet that has scientific evidence to reduce cognitive decline after a stroke, and that's called the MIND diet. And that stands for Mediterranean Intervention for Neurodegenerative Delay. And we were so intrigued by that at I Care for Your Brain that Carrie made us a wonderful handout that's going to be part of what you guys get sent today or tomorrow through email that tells you all about the MIND diet, a lot about the research, and how to try to incorporate the MIND diet more into you or your loved one's world. Basically, it's an anti-inflammatory diet that is low on things like sugar and carbs, and high on things like high quality fats and vegetables and nuts and beans. And it's not a gimmick, it's not a fad, there's no products, it's basically clean eating. And the more we are involved with preparing clean foods, my experience is the more that we enjoy them, right? And so we kind of see them go from their whole food to, you know, getting cut up to getting cooked, and including the person in the decision making about this. You know, even something like, should I put in a little lime or should I put in a little lemon? We sometimes forget how human it is to be involved with food And this is a great area where you can bring some creativity back in. Anything that is repetitive and calming or soothing to the nervous system is helpful for your brain recovery. So for some people, this is prayer. For some people, this is being out in nature. For some people, this is guided meditation. For some people, this is calming music, okay? What I care about is that you make some time every day to be enveloped in a quiet, centered environment, your state of mind or your immediate environment outside of you. It really does. There's so much chaos. There's so much static in our everyday life. It's really important that we try to stay focused on what's important, realize what is something to fret about, what is not. Taking this time to pause. This is a great time to really reflect on those little small victories that you will see in your recovery when you put in that effort. Really helps us think about the big picture. Again, meditation can also help reduce those stress hormones that we don't want, that cortisol, that adrenaline, and really helps to increase those feel-good chemicals in the brain that are much more healthful for brain recovery. I thought this was really interesting. I always try to find specific stroke research to share with you all. So in one study that was done last year, 2 weeks of mindfulness meditation exercises were shown to improve post-stroke spasticity. And what I love about that is you wouldn't necessarily think that meditating would help with spasticity. And I think partially it's how we have become trained to think about an impairment and what rehab is going to help that impairment, right? So you have spasticity, that's physical. Well, you should have to do a physical thing. A physical thing would be Botox. A physical thing would be, hand strengthening exercises. And of course, those are all wonderful too. But this finding, to me, the meditation finding, helping spasticity, really speaks to the fact that we aren't just brain, it's spirit too. And we have to have the right soil in ourselves and in our brain to plant the seeds for recovery. And if we're stressed and we're tense and we're focused on what's not going well, and we are constantly feeling like all we're doing is striving, working, and we're never in kind of contemplative, reflective, appreciative mode, then we're not doing our brain any favors. Having that calm, centered space every single day should really improve all aspects of your recovery. And I thought that this quote here from John Kabat-Zinn was really, really inspiring. He says, "As long as you're breathing, there is more right with you than is wrong, no matter what is wrong." Right? So I know a lot of you feel very grateful that you survived your stroke, and I'm grateful for that as well. And so sometimes it's just helpful to just even get as simple as that. I'm here, I'm alive, I'm continuing to have a human experience. I maybe can't do what I used to do. And there really is a time and a place to be sad about that, to experience that as a loss. But you also are still a spirit that is worthy of feeling good and experiencing all the things in life, okay? So when there's breath, there's hope. Mental imagery, I love this research. I think that this is really interesting. So a couple of years ago, there were some researchers in China who basically did some MRI research to determine that when we think about doing something, the exact same parts of the brain that we would need to actually do it are activated, okay? So let's just imagine for a minute, you can't use your left hand, right? And we know that when the brain doesn't get stimulation from the feeling of moving it, from the pulling of the ligaments, from the moving of the muscles, that the brain, part of the brain that controls that left hand, isn't getting stimulated. And that's what we worry about. That's the use it or lose it mentality, right? So when you just imagine in your mind and you visualize your left hand moving and you see it giving a thumbs up, maybe some other finger gestures if you get mad, if you're driving, you imagine in your mind's eye doing things like this, the same exact part of your brain is actually being stimulated. How cool is that? And why don't we teach people with stroke that doing visualization and mental imagery is an amazing portable, free, no risk form of rehab, okay? So results have shown that mental practice in combination with other treatment is more effective in improving upper extremity function, so arm or hand, than just doing the treatment alone. So once again, I'm not saying forego all of your traditional therapies. What I'm saying is if you add in creativity, if you add in mental imagery, my hair is going crazy. If you add in other mindful supporting therapies, these people do better, okay? So now you know, right? So in addition to, I'm thinking of you, Jerry, in addition to using your new robo arm, when you're not using it, as you go to sleep at night, you can spend 10 minutes very vividly visualizing your arm. You know, imagine playing tennis with that arm. Imagine, you know, as realistic as you can make it. What would that hand feel like? Imagine it touching cashmere, right? Imagine taking your hand and rubbing it on your face. The more complex and varied you can make that visualization, the more that it is going to help rebuild these networks. I just think that is absolutely awesome science in action. So there's two different ways that you can do imagery. You can either do it in an external way, or you can do it in an internal way. So what I was just saying to Jerry is to do it in an internal way. And so what this means is to imagine what it would feel like to do that action within your own body, okay? But it also, interestingly, works just as well if you imagine seeing yourself from the viewpoint of someone else, so someone watching you. So what would actually be primo is if somebody would do both, right? There's your complexity. You're adding both in. So one night, Jerry, you might imagine your own self in your own body and imagine how that would feel to have your full left hand back. Or you can also imagine, you know, let's just say again, you're playing tennis, you're playing guitar, and your wife is watching you and you see what she sees, right? It's a different perspective, but both are still stimulating that same part of the brain. Remember I said before, even if you don't want to be creative, just looking at art, right? Just the visceral reaction that our brain has when we look at something that is aesthetically well-balanced or beautiful or provoking. So they have done studies where engaging in regular visual art intervention improves a part of the brain that's involved with spatial navigation. Isn't that so interesting? It also has been shown to improve something called psychological resilience. And we're going to talk about that a whole lot next week. That's what next week's rule is all about. But it's the idea of feeling emotionally strong, feeling like you can kind of roll with the punches a little bit more in life. So isn't that funny? Just looking at art makes us feel more emotionally strong. I'm very curious what that's all about. I don't know, is it a sense of, wow, if somebody can paint the Mona Lisa, you know, then I can do this too. Maybe it's even unconscious and we don't know, but people have very strong positive reactions to simply viewing art. I'm really excited to talk with you all about mirror box therapy tonight. This has one of the most, no more yellow jackets, one of the strongest research bases for hemiparesis, which is just having a arm or a hand that's not working great, or if any of you have any pain syndromes in a limb that's not working good. Unfortunately, that is a very common thing after a stroke. It can be there, it can come and go, it can be the first sign of a motor recovery, but many people have helped me understand it's a horrible, horrible thing, and there's sometimes it's hard to find the medication. So I always make sure people know about mirror box therapy. Okay, so you're seeing a mirror box right there. What it is you basically put it in front of you and you put your not so good hand in that little mesh part. There's kind of like a little cubby back there, and you put your, I don't like to say the word bad hand, but let's just say impaired hand, okay? And then you put your good hand over here, okay? And then you look at the mirror. So as you move your good hand, what your brain sees is a visual illusion. And your brain thinks, oh my God, my left hand is back. It's working beautifully. So all this therapy is basically moving your right hand and watching the mirror. You can do all sorts of things with your right hand. You can stretch it out. You can do the finger to thumb thing. You can, all sorts of things, vacillate back and forth. The whole idea is that your brain gets the visual feedback that your impaired arm or hand is working again. This helps with range of motion. This helps with hand grasp. It helps people get dexterity back, speed back, absolutely evidence-based. And what's really cool is not only does it seem to help when people are doing the actual therapy, but what really also helps, hold on one sec. Recycling people came. What really helps, I think the research that's really promising is that it extends into everyday life too. So when people do mirror box, it's not that they just are being stimulated during mirror box. They get the use of their hand back in everyday life, like opening jars or being able to, have a not so much of a strong kind of a claw muscle posture, but they're actually able to get more use of it back in everyday life. So it's a little bit of like a magic trick, but I promise you that it absolutely works. You're basically getting your brain to kind of believe a little white lie that the arm is back again. And it really is pretty powerful for rebuilding the brain network that connects the limb to the brain. So there's been a lot of research on this. Like I said before, there's many things that it improves. Also, your strength in your hand also has been shown. Some people can use it on the leg, and it's been shown to improve walking. People have longer strides when they walk after they use mirror box, balance, and being able to pick up something like a little pill or like a Cheerio. Again, here's a theme we keep hearing. It works best when it's combined with the traditionals, with PT, with OT. It is an add-on. It's not necessarily a standalone. The session length should be increased gradually. This is a pretty major stimulation for your brain. And even if you do it for 2 weeks, I've heard people here getting results. And what's nice is that even up to 3 months, those results seem to stick. So sometimes people use it for a little bit, get a benefit, and then they put it away and they bring it out in 3 months. It's discomfort-free, doesn't really cost that much, doesn't need any supervision, and you can basically do it. What I sometimes recommend to people is even when they're watching TV, stick your hand in the thing, and every commercial, just look down and move your hand a little bit. And then next thing you know, you've done 20 minutes over the course of a movie. Pretty awesome. So in that handout that we're going to send you, we'll also tell you a little bit more about how to do this. I so much believe in this therapy that I reached out to the guy that makes one of the mirror boxes and asked him if he could please give our people a discount. And sure enough, he said, I'll give you 10% off. So this link here on the bottom, you can go on his website. I think with the discount, it winds up being $40 or $50. But you can also make one yourself. Plenty of people make them. You can go on YouTube and just search, make your own mirror box. Pretty darn easy to set up a mirror and a little thing where your hand goes in. So you don't even have to buy it. But sometimes people like the official thing. So this creative approach to rehab, breathing life in, making it more colorful, more spontaneous, more fun, has research. This isn't just a bright idea that I have. This improves cognition, physical impairments, helps your immune system, quality of life, self-confidence, less anxiety, lowers blood pressure, okay? Helps with social isolation. I think that's that bridge idea. Helps people feel less stressed. Yes, the results are kind of a little bit softer, not as easy to quantify as, oh, well, you're gonna get more grip strength back in your hand. But I don't think we should measure all stroke recovery so quantitatively and so concretely. Some things just make people feel better. Some things just make people feel good. So the way I want you to think about this is to give yourself the gift of creativity, and that recovery is really not just about your physical self, right? It must include your emotional needs, your spiritual needs, and creativity really gives us a sense of spontaneity, right? Creativity is not predictable. It's not linear. It's spontaneous. It can be playful, right? When you sit there and you get out some paints and you start painting, I mean, it's kind of funny, right? You can kind of just, there's kind of a lightness that happens when we're doing creative things, which I think is a nice contrast to the heaviness and the seriousness that sometimes can come into stroke recovery. It can make people feel kind of amazed. I mean, even if you put a couple lines of watercolor on a paper, I mean, I've seen some of those that look absolutely beautiful. And like, I've done that and I thought, oh my God, I can't believe that looks so good. Or, I share it with someone else who's working next to me, and it's just kind of a nice breather from the heaviness and the oomph that you have to put into so many of the other therapies, I think. And really, in some ways, to me, this rule comes down to this question that you all face, which is, are you going to be in the stroke survivor side of things, or are you trying to be on the stroke thriver side of things? And sometimes you're both, and sometimes you're very much one, and other times you feel like you're doing better and you're on the other side. But I think that creativity is something that offers you the chance, even if it's in the moment, to feel like you are thriving and you're more in touch with who you are as a person. So this is our self-empowerment statement for this rule. It is, I will thrive in my recovery by embracing creativity. Okay, so I want you guys to say that. I will thrive in my recovery by embracing my creativity. I think that sounds pretty darn good to me. So we're going to do our Q&A in 1 minute, but I'm going to leave this up here. What we're going to talk about next time, October 15th, is rule number 5, which is all about prioritizing sleep. I have been doing a lot of research on sleep apnea recently and was shocked to learn that 70% of you statistically will develop obstructive sleep apnea after you have your stroke. And sleep, remember, that's part of our enriched environment. That's the hard work and the hard rest, right? So if sleep is not going good for you, your recovery cannot be optimal. So next week's rule is that we are just going to talk about sleep, and talk about all of the important things that we need to do in order to have good quality and good quantity sleep. So if you guys have any questions, you can put them into the Q&A here. I see Jerry already said to me, line dancing, woohoo! That's because you live in Texas, Jerry. We don't have that kind of thing. Well, I probably do have these kind of things in North Carolina, but if I had to increase my creativity, I think that I would probably get some really nice big, I think I love art, but I'm probably more of an appreciator and observer than I am a doer. I think art books, beautiful photo books. I really like Georgia O'Keeffe. And for Christmas, in fact, this year, I got a big, beautiful book about all of Georgia O'Keeffe's New Mexico paintings, which I absolutely love. And sometimes when I'm feeling kind of stressed and tense, just opening that book and just looking at those paintings, it's like it gives me kind of a mental vacation, and it makes me feel kind of a sense of awe and wonder about how she did that. And wow, that was such a different thing for an artist to do back in the 20s and 30s. It just kind of, again, that creative problem solving kind of takes your mind to a different place. Also, there's so many ways to incorporate art into family gatherings too, because if you're human, you can be creative, right? It might not look great, it might not sound great, but we can certainly participate. So things like, family sing-alongs, having everyone, I don't know if you ever have done something, there's something called an exquisite corpse, where you can take a piece of paper and fold it into a bunch of different slices, and everybody draws one slice, but they don't see what the other person drew, and you send it around the table, and by the end you open it up and it's like the kookiest, craziest, funnest thing. That's kind of a 2-for-1, because you're getting that communal social time, but you're also getting a person to contribute and to be creative and kind of part of the gang. I think that's a really fun one. Okay, Mr. Heim, you said, does constraint-induced movement therapy or mirror box therapy help ataxia? Absolutely. Ataxia is kind of funny term because it's a umbrella term, and it's strange to me sometimes that people use it for different phenomenon. But the way I think of it, Stephen, you can tell me if this is the way you think of it, is it's like trouble with motor planning and doing movements in the proper sequence. And very often that can be a consequence of a cerebellar injury. It's, you know, it's one of those things when your brain is healthy, you just do things and you don't even think about it, right? So I've got my water here, and if I want it, my hand just reaches out and I grab the cup and I put it up to my lips and I drink it and I put it back down. But that actually involved like 27 steps to actually get my muscles and my flexors and my lips and my throat and the glass and the weight of the glass. It's all a plan that has to unfold for me to do that successfully. So a lot of times with ataxia, people can have kind of like jerky movements, and it's just kind of hard to make it smooth and coordinated. And so I could look into mirror box and ataxia, but there's no reason to think that it wouldn't work. Oh, so you're thinking more, okay, speed, intention tremor. Well, in a way though, so intention tremor, right? You can think of it like when you're going to do something. A resting tremor is if your hand's just kind of sitting here, like Parkinson's. And intention tremor, again, more cerebellum. So an intention tremor would be like I have my cup here and my hand does pretty good all the way up right until I get it, right at the goal, right at the intention is when I start to have trouble. That I would say is more like in the tremor category. But this is kind of what I'm saying about ataxia. Like, it depends who you talk to. Some people would say that that's ataxia. Other people would say that that's more intention tremor. I don't know the literature on mirror box with tremor. It's really done a lot with amputations, like phantom limb pain, but also really big in the stroke community to get back sensation, to get back flexibility, to get back motion, strength, grasp, things like that. I don't know, the way I guess I think about it is for 40 bucks, I would probably try it or try to make one of my own. And then honestly, Stephen, you could report back to us and tell us, you know, if you felt like it was helpful for the tremor. So Jerry says he always has Barb look in the mirror box to see if it's working. She's amazed how it works. It's really cool. The mirror box, it's so, it really hits me in a sweet spot of who I try to be as a doctor, because I like that it's not fancy. It's anyone can have it. There's money isn't going to keep you from getting a mirror box, right? You can always, you know, try to make one, go on YouTube, and it actually works. I love lo-fi science. That is such a cool thing. It makes it accessible to all people. All right, let me see. I think I have another question down here. Oh my God, Jerry, you want to see the pic of the, can you guys believe a flippin' yellow jacket? I mean, honestly, what is going to happen next? A bear is going to come in here or something? I mean, I will post, I'll send it around to you guys. I'll send it to Carrie and she can put it in the email, and then I'll post it on Facebook too. Oh my God. That one was way scarier though, because you saw when it tried to come at me, I freaked out. Nobody wants to be stung by a yellow jacket, that's for sure. I thought we were done with that. It's October. I thought those bees went away by now. So like I said, I'll be back with you guys October 15th, 4 o'clock. I think it's a really important one. Your sleep is hugely important to your recovery. If you're having any kind of sleep issues, by all means, please tune in. Thank you guys so much for your attention and your interest and trusting me to be on this journey with you. It truly is an honor, and I care about you and respect all you guys very much out there working so hard to make your best recovery. I hope you guys have a good week, and I'll be happy to see you next time, next Thursday. Take care, you guys. Bye-bye.